Welcome to the specialist episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast. Look, I can touch her. I can touch her. We're in person.
There's a baby.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could get weird and just touch the belly, but I'm not going to for the moment. Hello.
Hello. In person. Live from Cincinnati.
That's right. Live from Cincinnati.
Yes.
We bring you the IBS Freedom Podcast.
I know. So exciting. It's so crazy.
I cannot believe that we're seeing each other in the flesh. This is almost 4 years overdue.
I know.
We're recording this really close to our anniversary of when a creepy creeper reached out to you on the internet and said, you don't know me.
I feel like we should read those at some point out into the...
We should.
It's funny because Armand saved our message, like our first message on Match. Because we met on Match and it was so random and weird. And I'm very happy that we have it. Because I think he was telling me he was in Las Vegas. And I was like, did you lose all the monies? And we talked about Vegas and stuff, which is just like, there's a lot of weird rabbit holes you can go down about Vegas. But yeah, so
that's adorable though that you saved that.
I know.
Aww.
So we have our saved first conversation too.
We do on Facebook Messenger.
Yes, of all things. Thank you, Mark Zuckerberg.
That's right. Amen.
Yes.
But here's the pressure is on because this is our first episode.
I know the pressure is on
in person.
I'm feeling like sweaty palms, pressure.
It's okay. You're with me, darling.
You
don't have to feel the pressure.
I know.
But I had proposed this as a topic for our in-person episode. And it's the idea of not giving up. Mm-hmm. Because honestly, I think a lot of our people are very frustrated and worn out and just maybe resentful and angry. Like there's a lot of emotions that go into this kind of a healing journey. And while the reality is that you might never feel better and you have to kind of grapple with that reality, I feel like a message of don't give up, keep plucking along. Like maybe even if we have any stories, not to put us on the spot thinking of stories, but do you want to start maybe by talking about something that we've mentioned before, which is the idea that you can absolutely take a break from a healing journey? And then we could dive into like, don't give up.
Well, I think sometimes when people hear never give up, they think that they need to work harder. I just need to work harder and eliminate more
every
foods
day.
And I need to do all the things. And it's like, well, no, you don't. I think you need to work maybe a little smarter or change some of the strategies. So I do think there's a difference there. And I think some people are so burnt out from trying things or they feel like they've tried everything, which we've been over before. You haven't tried everything. So I think that just keeping that in mind when we're going through just this discussion, it's just you haven't tried everything. Maybe you need to change how you're approaching the never give up type of attitude. But taking a break, I think, could be really helpful if you've been burnt out on this journey and you just feel like there's not tons of energy at the present moment. So yeah, I think, again, I always talked about it more so in the SIBO space, but IBS in general is like you can take a SIBO or IBS break for just kind of do the bare minimum that generally kind of helps you get through the day for 2 or 3 months and then revisit your strategies with a fresh mind without, being burdened by everything. And I do think sometimes too, there's periods of time where it might make sense if you don't have the capacity, if you're dealing with, a sick loved one or someone pass, like again, these really hard, stressful life periods. I even think sometimes pregnancy is like this. Sometimes I'll get patients and they're like, I need to fix my gut, but I'm pregnant. And I'm like, well, we can definitely do things to kind of, maybe keep things going. But it might just be kind of a time to sort of figure out what works in the moment and then kind of pursue some things a little bit later on. Like you can get some ducks in a row, but it's still kind of maybe a more stressful time. So knowing the capacity that you have going into like whatever time period you're in, I think is really important to acknowledge too.
I think that's a good way to put it. The idea of capacity, like again, a good example with pregnancy, your body is going through a lot and there's a lot of probably both physical and psychological stressors that go into pregnancy and preparing for childbirth. So you might not have the bandwidth, the wherewithal to take on a new supplement regime or a bunch of new testing or a new functional doctor or a new workout routine or a new whatever.
Right.
And I think maybe it's the difference between maintaining versus striving. Right. And to maybe paint an analogy here, it's like in your work life, okay, are you doing what's required of you for the job so that you don't get fired? Or are you pushing, trying to get the promotion?
Right.
You don't need to put, contrary to the American view on life, you don't need to be in that push, get the promotion mode all the time. I think that we could give ourselves permission to just kind of exist and live our life. And that might mean living life with some degree of symptomology. And it's not perfect. It's messy. Welcome to human existence. But maybe resetting for a couple of months before you go into that push mode would be beneficial for people.
Yeah. And I think too, if you've been pushing for, a year or even months, like if you've just been pushing and not really making progress too, it makes sense to take a break and kind of just reset and figure out where you need to go from here. But yeah, I think I like that we're starting the conversation of just kind of assessing where you're at. Does it make sense to kind of like do an additional push? But, a push doesn't necessarily mean like doing all the things at one time or going to any extreme. Like, I don't know. Sometimes the never give up attitude to me is like the Nike ads, which are just like, just do it. And like there's dripping sweat and they're drinking Gatorade. And it's like, again, more the idea of maybe you need to change what that looks like for you, like never giving up, or change some of the strategies. You don't want to just be doing the same things over and over again that aren't working too, which I think a lot of people get stuck doing.
Yeah. Well, antimicrobial after round of antimicrobial, or, I've worked with people who have done 10 rounds of rifaximin.
Right.
And then the SIBO comes back for an 11th time and they're perplexed. And I'm like, yeah, but this makes sense. You did the same thing 10 times and you got the same result 10 times. So that's not really rocket science.
Right.
I think it reminds me a little bit of the conversation we had many moons ago on the podcast. And I believe the title of that episode was Short versus Long.
Yeah.
And we talked about most of the folks watching this podcast right now are very much in the headspace of, I need to feel better today or tomorrow at the absolute latest. And it's very like short-term, instant gratification kind of goal setting. And for the record, we get how you get in that place, and we don't want you to suffer for any longer than you already have. So we get it. But also when you're in that headspace of, I have to feel better immediately, you can't make good long-term decisions. And so it's like zooming out and looking at which one you're doing. And again, to kind of make this analogous to something else in our lives, we've all heard of get rich quick schemes, right? Right? Like we all want to be rich. We all want, the condo in the Bahamas or the house in the Bahamas or whatever it might be.
Right.
But I think most of us understand that the way to that path would most likely be working diligently over years and getting to the point where like your business or your invention or whatever is successful. And then you can kind of kick back and enjoy the fruit of that labor. But there are so many like multi-level marketing kind of companies, and there are scams galore, and they promise, oh, you could be rich in like a week and it'll be great. And we'll give you, a pink Bentley or whatever it is that Mary Kay gives now. And that's so appealing and it's so sexy. And it's like, oh man, I can get the reward sooner with like a fraction of the work. Holy crap, that's amazing. Of course, a lot of people are going to be tempted by that path. But again, I think if we zoom out and we have a discussion with like 10 rational people in a room together, we would all agree that building something the right way and diligently putting in the work over time is really what's going to get you there. So similarly, you go into the Facebook forums and the SIBO groups and everybody's talking about, this is the one antimicrobial that saved me. And oh my God, my bloating went away the following day and it was a miracle. It was the best ever. But they're not talking about sleep, stress, nutrition, movement, vitamins, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I think so much of the marketing in the SIBO space is focused on short-term results and relief. And that's so tricky to get out of that mindset. So again, I totally get it. We see why you're falling into this mindset.
Yeah.
I think one thing that can help if you are falling in that mindset, because I think it's really helpful if you're not expectant of like major changes in symptoms with each intervention. Now, again, like if you find something that helps with symptoms a lot, like that's a great bonus.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean, like what you're saying, you've built a resilient body quite yet. Like if you find a supplement that's been really helpful, more power to you. That's awesome. I'm glad you found something that's kind of maybe pushing the needle symptom-wise. But all the stuff that pushes the needle symptoms-wise long-term is not going to give you relief in a day. And I think that that's the tricky part with like never giving up. I would say never giving up on the things that are probably going to provide long-term relief, but are going to take longer to achieve that type of relief. And I think part of the problem too is when you have people tracking and checking and assessing and they're
obsessing.
Yeah, obsessing. They're obsessing about their symptoms. They're magnifying their symptoms every day with how they're behaving around their symptoms. It makes it harder to be patient for the long-term results. And so again, I think if you can just zoom out even from that, like where you're thinking like, okay, maybe I assess progress monthly or like bi-monthly even with some interventions and kind of see like, ooh, am I noticing any benefits gut-wise, and kind of assessing that way versus like day to day, minute by minute, second by second, I think, or meal by meal. Like if every meal you're just saying like, well, my gut's messed up. I need to start adding stuff in to make progress. And it's like, I've definitely worked with people too, where like no matter what supplement they take, they have bigger fish to fry and they're not necessarily going to make huge, they're not going to get huge results from any supplement. I don't know if you've seen this.
I mean, the supplements can only do so much, right? Like we put them on a pedestal and we act like they're prescription medications, which they are not. And it's not to downplay the role of like herbs and supplements, but we expect the oregano or the probiotic or the whatever to make us completely, totally new people with zero bloating within the span of 3 days. And that's just not reasonable.
Right.
And again, it's especially if you have been sick for a long time or you've been symptomatic for a long time.
I see this a lot too with people that have been like undernourished for a long time. In particular, it's going to take longer to see effects, and they might get some benefit by taking enzymes or prokinetics or things like that. But if you're having a lot of metabolic like budgeting, I would say, if your body's just shutting systems down to try to maintain like heart function and lung function, it's just really challenging to make progress. So I'd almost say if you're someone that has had a lot of weight loss or you've been malnourished for a while, you almost have to tack on like, 3 to 6 months to sort of nourish your body so that things can kind of regulate better before you're even really going to make tons of progress, I think, gut-wise.
Yeah.
And again, I see that so often. So sometimes, again, like when I'm working with someone really more compromised nutritionally, you almost have to just keep reminding them, like, I know this stinks. And part of the problem too is if you're malnourished, a lot of your digestive capacity goes down. And so it's harder to get over that hump.
It's hard to eat a lot when you don't feel good.
Yeah, I think, again, like the most extreme kind of version of this would be, outright eating disorders. When you look at studies on eating disorders, like all of them have horrendous gut symptoms. Now, again, like a lot of our patients who might have been like unintentionally undereating, like it's a different thing than maybe like anorexia. But a lot of the malnutrition could potentially be somewhat similar, maybe not to the degree of some of these anorexia people that are in facilities and stuff like that. But you have some of the same issues. But like literally all of the patients have symptoms, and then refeeding helps the symptoms. But it takes weeks and weeks and weeks.
And refeeding in this very extreme case, refeeding could be like 5,000 calories a day.
Right.
For like a teeny woman.
Right.
So it can be really, really intense.
Right. And really tough. And they're having to overcome their gut symptoms during the process, which is really challenging. But I think, again, that's not a message that's discussed enough to where it's like, okay, you have to probably deal with some of the discomfort of renourishing your body in order to experience the benefit.
And you know what? I don't know why I haven't phrased this for people before, but this made me think, like, as I meet people who want to work with me one-on-one, or I meet people, or my assistant meets with people who want to do FODMAP Freedom, maybe a good question to ask people and kind of gauge where they're at is, if necessary, would you be willing to push through and deal with increased symptoms or increased discomfort for a few months if it meant that you got better in the long term? Because that's actually something that never really clicked in my brain until now. I think a lot of people will say that they're willing to do what it takes, but they mean in the sense of, I will cut anything out of my diet.
Yeah.
I will take any mountain of supplements you tell me to. I'll spend money on testing. I'll spend money on supplements. But they're not necessarily willing, at least in my experience, a lot of people are not willing to have an increase in bloating for 2 to 3 months, or an increase in, diarrhea or whatever it might be for a month in order to push through and get to the other side.
Yeah. And I think part of that is about maybe re-education to a degree of like why this is so important. Because I was even on a call with someone from one of my programs, and it was interesting because they made sort of a comment like, yeah, I still think I'm under-eating a little bit, but like immediately directed back to like microbiome stuff. And I was like, wait, okay. If you're doing all this stuff for microbiome work and you're still under-eating, like there's no point. Right. So, I think that there's still so much just fear around the microbiome, or like it's so many sexy topics that are so alluring that people don't understand the complexity of why it's so important to get nutrition in. But
I have a good one, by the way. So a good image to paint for us for like the 5th time already in this episode. My brain works on metaphors and analogies, if you could not tell people. It's like you have a sports car and you want to make the sports car go fast and perform really well. And you're getting lost shopping around for the coolest spoiler to put on the back of the car, but you're not putting gasoline in the freaking car.
Right.
Right? Like that's how silly this is.
Right.
To focus on the Klebsiella or the whatever in, the stool testing told you.
Right.
To focus on that, or shopping around for the best antimicrobial or the best probiotic, when something that glaringly obvious is staring you straight in the face.
Yeah, for sure. And again, there's sometimes like more nuancey questions. Like even in my program recently, we had a guy who had been through weight loss. And like at maybe his highest, he was more like 160 or 165, but he got down to 118. And I was like, whoa, that's a pretty big jump. But then he's been up to like maybe 130-ish now. And he said like, there's been periods of time where he's felt okay. Like more like around 140 would be like what he remembers being like pretty well at, or feeling pretty well at. And, the question is like, how much does he push? Because he's kind of maintaining his weight now. And I'm like, I have seen some people too where like they have to get to a certain set point weight to where their body kind of like feels safe. Because that's really what's happening metabolically when you're not getting enough nutrition is your body does not feel safe. And, digestion is not going to work well if your body does not feel safe. So this was like a really interesting discussion because it's like, ooh, does he try to push forward a little bit more and try to gain some of that weight and see generally if his gut symptoms? That was kind of like my thought of maybe you do need to add a little bit more calories in and try to push that up a little bit more and see if you notice any additional benefit. And I think it's probably good too if you're like still maybe slightly under what your typical weight is to push to maybe like a weight that you felt good at. Because again, I think metabolism, especially for certain people, can be really finicky. where you almost have to get to a certain weight, like set point to feel good.
Well, and I think you phrased it really well. I think that the body needs to feel safe. And again, to take it to some really absurd extreme, if you see, one of the kids from a third world country from like a Sarah McLachlan commercial, right? If you see, somebody like that whose body is clearly in a tremendous state of metabolic stress and they haven't eaten in months, not well at least, there's no way that their body and their nervous system feel safe. Right. So vagus nerve function out the window.
Right.
Rest and digest out the window. Sleep, digestion, like none of that's going to work. Your thyroid's not going to work. Versus if you look at somebody who's like a healthy body weight or a normal like body stature, if you look at the extremes, it's pretty easy to see the difference there. But yeah, it's like that poor kid from the Sarah McLachlan commercial might have to gain 30, 40 pounds before things start to work normally and their labs start to normalize.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think there can sometimes be like indicators too. Like you could maybe look at, like you said, like thyroid labs or something just to kind of see like what's going on metabolically. And you can get gauges from certain labs, but I almost think sometimes it is just about experimenting with like, oh, maybe you do need to push a little bit more. For me too, because I think when my SIBO started, I was around 135-ish. But there were periods of my, like, again, like typically I fall maybe more currently around 140. So I was like a little under that. But I don't think that was related to my SIBO blowing up, that little small weight change, but I was a little smaller. I was kind of doing a little bit more running and things like that, which might've been more related to my gut stuff. But I think I dropped down to maybe like 110. So there was a real significant shift. And again, I remember even for me, there was periods of time where I was getting enough to eat, but I felt like I didn't really feel good metabolically, like energy-wise, fatigue-wise. I definitely noticed a bump in my gut when I got up to like 135-ish, 140-ish. And again, I think that that's just generally where my body likes sitting. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, but I think it's a really key area that people overlook, or they think like, oh, I'm eating enough now, or like I'm maintaining my weight now, I'm good to go. And it could be an area too of just, you have to keep an eye on it for a while, and you might not necessarily get tons of symptom benefits right away, but like that would be an area to never give up on.
Yeah.
We're talking about not giving up on things. It's like, don't give up on trying to make sure you're nourished, because that's so key.
Yeah. Food is medicine, right? That's what the IFM, the Institute of Functional Medicine, wants us to preach from the rooftops. Right. But, we mean it from an actual nutrition perspective, not let's cut everything out and say that it's a therapeutic diet perspective.
Right. Yeah. It's a little distorted for sure. But yeah, I think, the other thing that is going to be similar to diet, where you're not going to get immediate results. And that's the thing too, when you pull back on looking at symptoms as your metric of success every day. Like if you're tracking every day and being like, well, I added that walk-in and I didn't get any symptom relief today. Like it's like, okay, that's not going to be super helpful for your long-term goals. But things like lifestyle and stuff, like slowly working on those goals across time is something to never give up on, even though you might not necessarily see crazy symptom benefits right out the gate.
And I think that there's another way to phrase it too, is that even if it did jack shit for your gut,
right,
would you be willing to continue going for your walk every day anyway, just because it's healthy for you?
Right.
So that's one possible angle too. Like, would you be willing to continue nourishing yourself and improving your relationship with health, even if it did nothing for your gut? Like, can we agree that it would be a good fundamental thing? And that kind of segues into pivoting from, I have to treat this disease, going from this headspace to, what does a human body need to be healthy? And what does a microbiome need to be healthy? And working from that angle.
Right.
And it's, it's funny because I remember this coming up in chiropractic school, even like the difference between allopathic or conventional Western medicine versus the more holistic professions like chiropractic. And I remember there was some discussion in one of my classes where it's like, the medical profession knows a lot, obviously, but they start with a template of disease and fixing the disease. So they're starting from this and then trying to go to health, versus we in like chiropractic and naturopathic medicine and like herbal medicine, I think that we learn more about the state of health of the human body, and then we're learning about the disease processes and the physiology so that we can help people come back to health. But I think that's a really big issue in this group, like the IBS and SIBO and gut health space, is that everybody's starting from this place of disease and trying to get rid of the disease. And you're trying to push away from this, as opposed to starting from a place of health and trying to pull yourself toward health.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I will say too, like, all these things interrelate too. It was interesting because this morning I had just watched some sort of TikTok or reel or something that popped up on my feed. And it was a guy talking about like the key organs of longevity. So he was talking about like you have to keep your heart really healthy in order to live longer. You have to keep your lungs healthy. And then his third one, he said thighs, which was kind of funny. But he said that people who historically have like stronger legs tend to live longer. And the whole point was not necessarily like the leg strength probably helped with heart and lungs, like if you're moving a lot more. But he was making the argument like they could stay connected to people. So he was saying, especially back, like historically, evolutionary speaking, like if you're walking places and you're able to see your friends and stay connected, like your legs are super important for overall health, which I thought was so interesting. But it's a good point of like, okay, if you're moving and you're doing health promotive things, like they stack on top of each other usually. And again, like if you are eating better and you have more energy, then you can kind of pursue more friendships or pursue career goals that you're really interested in, and like you're more connected to your life. But yeah, I think the stacking effect can also be really beneficial too. Some people, again, like maybe the nutrition piece doesn't necessarily budge symptoms. Usually it does to some degree, but maybe it doesn't budge your gut symptoms that much, but it makes everything else work better too. And I think that that's important. An important point to think about. Wow.
There you go.
I was like have you heard of pregnancy brain? That was like pregnancy mouth.
You heard it here first, folks. A new diagnosis. What's the ICD-10 code for that?
Pregnancy mouth.
Pregnancy mouth.
Yes. It's a new
thing. You learned it here. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I like that idea. And also to go back to that initial thing that I just shared about like pushing yourself away from disease or pulling yourself towards health. One way to break up your workouts, this is like the little exercise science geek in me coming out, by the way. So you could go to the gym and you could have like arm day, leg day, and core day, right? Or you could actually kind of frame your stuff as push and pull muscle groups. So an upper pull would be something like a curl or a row, versus an upper push would be something like a push-up. And then the same thing could be true for the thighs and the lower extremity. But it's like, so many of our people have been doing the push motion for so long, and their triceps and their pecs are just wiped, right? It's like you went to the gym every day for 3 years and you just did as many push-ups as humanly possible until your breaking point, and you went home sore AF every single day for years and years and years. Maybe eventually you need to give that muscle group a break and you need to work on the poor atrophied bicep on the other side of the arm. Right. So again, this idea of changing the angle that you're seeing this from, like a short-term versus a long-term kind of strategy, but also don't give up in the grand scheme of things. Like, again, you can work different muscle groups, so to speak. Like, you've already worked the push away from disease muscle group for a really long time. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably not better yet. So why don't you try to work a different muscle group and try pulling yourself towards health for once?
Yeah. Like you've tried every supplement known to man, and it's maybe helped a little bit, but it hasn't necessarily proven to be the answer for you.
If the amount of help you have gotten is disproportionate to the amount of money that you've spent on supplements.
Or time, energy too.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think of that too with like some of the restrictive diets. It's like, how much time and energy are you thinking about food? And being able to use that elsewhere and diversify your investments, so to speak. You're diversifying what eggs you're putting into different baskets. Like you said, if you're just putting all the eggs in the one basket by working out just one muscle group, you're going to get limited results. It's so interesting. And again, I think so enticing to do the supplement thing. Yeah. And another way too, with the moving towards health, it's like resilience building. It's like, okay, can you build some resilience up and make your body stronger, healthier? But thinking of it through that lens too, of just, okay, how can I make my body more resilient? Yeah. Versus focusing so much on like the dysfunction or SIBO or the microbiome or
whatever label you might have. And here, this is a good point that we could do because we're live together in the flesh. Amy, my darling, will you put your arm out flat, kind of like this, and a little bit higher for the camera's sake? Okay. So the cliff metaphor, right? We can finally do a visual here.
Okay.
So here's you walking along this road. And in this representation of the world, if your feet are on solid ground, you feel great. No symptoms, no bloating, no whatever. But the minute you go, and you fall off the cliff, that's when you are getting symptoms, right? Bloating, migraine, whatever it might be. And the idea of resilience is, okay, yeah, we want you to get on solid ground so that you feel better, but we also want you to march away from the edge of that cliff so that when you're way over here, you could get body slammed by an NFL linebacker and it's only going to move you here and you're not going to fall off the cliff. So this is, and I think a lot of us are, thank you for the prop. I think a lot of us are very familiar with this from our youth, right? Like when we're in college, you could pull an all-nighter, drink way too much, cram for your chemistry class all night the next night, eat nothing but a Costco-sized bag of peanut M&Ms, go to class, take the test, and collapse and then sleep for 24 hours to make up for the sleep deficit. And then you wake up and you're like, cool, I'm ready to do it again.
Right.
And that's because youth generally confers resiliency. We start off life generally further away from the cliff, but we do stupid stuff and we wear ourselves into the dirt for our entire adult existence and a lot of our adolescent existence too, striving to get into the best college, striving to get into the best grad school, whatever it might be. But we just run ourselves into the dirt so much that as the longer we live our life, most of us are inching closer and closer to that cliff. And that it's just a matter of time before, and we get some disease or some symptom that we don't want.
Yeah. And I think culturally too, we're not very good at, as a whole, prioritizing resiliency. Usually it is like, you better be as productive as possible, or you better be making this much money, or, you need to buy this type of house. It's all sort of it gets very intense very fast, I feel like, as you head into adulthood and stressors and things like that. But yeah, I think, it takes some changing if you're not used to that mindset too. And again, I've definitely worked with people where it's like, ooh, like there's no give in some of their lifestyle habits. And it's like, ooh, I think this is a big problem, but it's going to be hard to tackle. And it might take chipping away at it versus being like, well, you need to maybe move on from this really intense, stressful job. How do we do baby steps to help you kind of prioritize different things? But yeah, I think sometimes there's blind spots too in people's mindsets where they are like, oh, I work 80 hours a week, but I'm taking all these supplements. Like the supplement should help. And it's like, okay, we need to find a way to dial this back or figure out a way to work a reasonable amount of time so you have time for rest versus, work.
And that's where getting another brain and eyes and ears on your case can be helpful. if you are receptive to the coaching.
Yeah.
That's the key, is like, I know we've talked about clients, no PHIs shared, people, no names, but like we talk about cases sometimes, just the reality. But, there are people that you and I have worked with that we tell them pretty point blank, like, you are under eating. This is the most likely culprit behind your symptoms, and they will not listen. Or, there have been people that I've had to talk to about like relationships and maybe working on difficult relationships as a root of what they're trying to deal with. Trauma, like there's a lot of stuff that we will bring up and people are just closed-minded to it and they don't want to hear it. And I have this thought pop into my mind sometimes of like, why are you paying me so much money if you're not going to listen to my advice? Like, isn't the whole point that you want my advice? But yeah, I think oftentimes we want to have our cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
We want to have our crappy lifestyle and our stressful, crappy life and our 80-hour-a-week work week.
Right.
And our dietary preferences. We don't want to get off our vegan diet or carnivore diet or whatever it might be. And we want to feel great. It's like, you can't always get both of those things. You can't have your exact same life and feel great. Like maybe your current life is not conducive to feeling good.
Right. And I think that that's the change of lens too, of like, okay, never give up and you have to do maybe hard, difficult things. But again, it's not usually like, sometimes it's not the things people think. And again, I will say too, another big area is, sleep, where people are like, well, I get 6 hours of sleep. That's fine. And it's like, I don't know. Like maybe you can cope with that in the context of not having some of these issues going on, but it's certainly not helping your resiliency getting 6 hours of sleep every night. And again, like it's funny because as a mom and with a horrible sleeper, she did not sleep very well. So like there was definitely a lot of nights where I got under 6 hours of sleep, but that was never my goal. I knew that I feel better with, 7.5 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's again, it's the blind spots that you hear from people where they're like, well, I get 6 hours. That's enough. It's like, ooh, that's the mindset that you need to chip away at a little bit and try to figure out. And sometimes people do struggle with true like sleep issues, which you might have to work through, but it's still like pushing you of how can we get you more sleep?
Yeah. Well, like I had a student in FODMAP Freedom this spring and summer. And I gave her flack for this in person. So I think it's okay for me to tell the story here so other people can learn from this. But when we got to the sleep conversation in FODMAP Freedom, I remember we talked about how both of us are kind of night owl-y. We'd like to stay up late and then sleep in a little bit more. And I was explaining, yeah, but now that I understand this about myself, I can be diligent. And if I'm really good about going to bed at like 10:30 or 11, I can do it. I just have to be kind of on it.
Right.
If I allow my brain to stay up until like 1 a.m., I'm going to party all night.
Right.
And then the next night is a nightmare. And so I have to kind of nip it in the bud when that happens, maybe take a little bit of melatonin to reset. But generally, the big thing for me is just being more consistent with my go to bed time.
Right.
And then I can make it work. And I don't think that idea was super appealing to her. I think she more wanted to like commiserate over, oh, we're night owls and there's nothing we can do about it.
Right.
And as I got to know her through the Q&As, she has a lot of anxiety. And I know last I knew she was looking for a new therapist so she could work through that a bit. But, every so often I would check back in with her and see if she's working on the sleep and the stress and the anxiety thing. And it was kind of on the back burner-ish, or like, oh, I'm still looking for a therapist, or like, oh, I haven't done the sleep yet. Like, and, we started talking, she can't turn off her brain at night, which anxiety.
Right.
Like maybe you're not a night owl. Maybe you're just anxious.
Right.
There's a difference between those two things. And so, we're working through some of this. And then I kid you not, we get to like the week 10 or 11 Q&A. And she asks, have you heard about Camel milk for SIBO? And I misheard her. And Stephanie did the same thing in her Q&A. We were like, chamomile?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I like chamomile tea. It's awesome. It's a prokinetic. We start talking about chamomile. She's like, no, camel milk. And I'm like, the milk from a camel? Like, you live in California. Where are you going to get this? She's like, oh, you can ship it. And we start getting into the debate of whether it's useful for SIBO for like a nanosecond. And then I realized, I was like, name, are you still in the Facebook groups and the forums?
Yeah.
Where did you find this camel milk thing? And she confessed she was still in Facebook groups. And that's like rule number 1 in FODMAP Freedom. The very first video of the whole dang program, I tell you to leave all of those groups and forums. And you're not allowed to Google anything for 100 days.
Oh, man.
So that was a big no-no.
Right.
I caught her in the act in a big way. But again, like, here's this person who I know darn well needs to prioritize sleep, needs to prioritize mental health, needs to work on anxiety. And then she's going into these Facebook groups and she's pulling out the most random shit possible from these groups that are super anxiety provoking. Like every couple months, I go into the Facebook groups and I inevitably send you multiple Marco Polos because I'm so stressed out by the content in those groups. I cannot imagine going in those groups on a regular basis or having them in my newsfeed, heaven forbid. But here's a very anxious person with sleep issues because she can't turn off her brain. And she's filling up her brain with nonsense like camel milk for SIBO. And it's like,
we need to give up on those things. We need to give up on Facebook.
Give up on the Facebook groups and the Reddit threads.
But don't give up on solving your anxiety and your sleep.
And sleep. It's fundamental, foundational stuff.
Yeah. And I had a client recently who like had her sleep schedules like kind of gradually move back and back. And it's like, even if it's something where it's like, okay, maybe you're making 15-minute or 20-minute like chunks each week, pushing your sleep schedule back. I don't think it has to go from like 1 a.m. till 10 p.m. or something. If that's the goal, you can kind of work your way back to it, but it still has to be like the end game has to be getting more sleep and not giving up on that goal. But yeah, I think the fundamentals, like we always talk, get sort of lost in the sauce because there's so much like fear, anxiety, marketing, all the different factors kind of moving people away from the long-term gains. And I will say too, one other aspect of this like never giving up mind like idea is also just being able to see success. Because I feel like sometimes what I have, like patients have been down this road for 5 years and have only like circled the whack. Like it's been just a carousel. Like maybe they get a little bit better, but they get worse. Like there's been no real long-term success. So they've been just on this merry-go-round for 5 years. And so it makes sense maybe that they mentally are like, burnt out. And again, maybe that's a good time to take a break. But I also think you have to sort of be able to like envision or see success to a degree. So sometimes when I've had patients that have been very fried, is having them actually visualize success. Like, what does it look like in 6 months if you do some of these things and really implement these strategies? Like, what does your life look like? What are you doing? Who are you with? Where are you? Like, what kind of goals do you want to do? How are you feeling? Like, emotion-wise, that can help with visualizations. Trying to sort of connect with like gratitude or joy or happiness when you're doing visualizations. But I think just going through the exercise of trying to see like what success looks like when you feel it hasn't been something you've grasped for so long. I think doing that practice can be really helpful to just kind of keep your eye on like, what does health look like? What does it look like to feel good for you? And like, what are you doing? And you can also try to do more of the things that are in that image. Because I think we've talked about this too, where people sort of stop living their lives in order to focus all their energy on their gut stuff. And instead, if there's a way to sort of make that vision more of a reality, even before you get there, health-wise, I think you want to do it. If a healthy you is playing tennis 5 times a week or something, 4 times a week, if you love doing that, why don't you play tennis for 20 minutes a couple times a week to start and then kind of build from there? So it gives you sort of a good outline of what long-term success looks like and how you can sort of start working your way there. But understanding that that's going to take time, and just having faith and patience that it's going to take time is so key. It can't, like, this success can't be rushed. Putting timelines on things can get you into real trouble.
Well, and a good analogy here would be like sports. I remember when I was a rower in college, I think my coach, so one of my coaches was a younger guy. He was maybe in his mid to late 20s when he was coaching us. So he was kind of one of the gang. And I remember, I think he went to like a conference or a seminar, and he came back and he was, he had all these new ideas. And one of them, he wanted us to sit and visualize winning the race. And at the time, admittedly, I thought, oh, that sounds so dumb, like a big waste of time.
Yeah.
And I didn't know at the time that there's a lot of research on this, that athletes that visualize crossing the finish line first, they visualize the perfect race, they visualize the perfect whatever, like they're more likely to perform well and win that race. So there is actually scientific validity to this, but it's sort of similar. It's like, if you don't even imagine what the finish line looks like, how are you going to get there? Like, you're going to run the wrong way. You're going to be going backwards on the racetrack because you don't even know what direction to turn your body toward. And so, thinking about, what does my life look like when I get there, and what can I start doing, just baby steps. And this we talked about on an episode not that long ago, the idea of have, do, be versus be, do, have. When I have symptomatic relief, I will do these things and I will be happy. Like, no, man, that's not how it works.
Right.
You have to learn how to be happy and grateful for what you do have, and start doing the things, even if it's 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there. And then you will finally have the symptomatic resolution that you want.
Right.
But you have to work that way. And again, I can't take credit for that. That's a James Wedmore coaching thing. But I think that's so brilliant. And, it's not to say that you just sit there with diarrhea on the toilet and you just like manifest abundance and that
say,
sort of thing.
I'm so grateful.
Yeah. Like, that's not what we're picturing here.
Right. It's okay to have like sucky days and like to even sometimes be like sucked into that a little bit, but you can't be stuck there.
That can't be your whole existence. Right. And the reality is that all of us, no matter how crappy your situation is, pun intended always, there's something you could be grateful for, whether it's a relationship in your life or the beautiful green grass outside, something, anything. And, trying to hook into that to the best of your ability can give you kind of an anchor point to start this path of, again, be, do, have, and get to where you want to be. But another part of, sorry. Oh no, I'm the one who touched the microphone. I always tease you.
I know.
I tease you that you're a bad podcaster because you touched the microphone. Gosh darn, I quit. That's it. That's
throw the towel in. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so embarrassed. Anyway, now I'm all flustered and I don't even know what point I was going to make, Amy. I'm a failure of a podcast host.
I can take over a little bit because I wanted to build on something that you're mentioning too, of like, I think people get so hooked in on their symptoms too. And there's actually some research to support this that, that people with IBS have a lot of visceral anxiety. They have a lot of hypervigilance, meaning they're zeroing in on their gut symptoms. We've talked about this before in multi-episodes at this point. Mm-hmm. But when you're magnifying those symptoms, it distracts you so much that, again, I think you think, oh, I can't have fun if I'm having these gut symptoms. It's kind of the mindset, or like, I can't go and do the things that I want to do because I have these gut symptoms. And again, like, there are some rare cases where I think that's the truth, where it's like, okay, if you're having like a really bad flare, maybe it makes sense to like stay home and chill and like rest.
Or like food poisoning.
Right.
If you have acute food poisoning and it's coming out both ends, you don't have to be there thinking, I'm so grateful for my mom and her support in my life. Like, you can just shit your brains out.
Yeah. But I think, it is very helpful to get in the mindset of like, oh yeah, I am bloated today, but like I was still able to go to work and I was still able to like enjoy a conversation that I had with a friend, and I was still able to do all these things. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you enjoy them to the extent that if you weren't having gut symptoms. But I think that that's like the goal that people get so latched in on when they start focusing on like, I have to be symptom free in order to enjoy my life. That's such a dangerous headspace to get into. And I think, again, like the more you get in that mindset, the harder it is to actually be symptom free because you're so locked in on symptoms that keeps your body in a state of like fear, hypervigilance, fight or flight, sympathetic tone type state when you look at all the symptoms as a threat instead of just like, something that's going to work itself out over time, the more you invest in some of these long-term strategies. But if every day you see your bloating as a threat and every day you're sort of triggered by your bloating, that's really a hard mindset to get out of.
There's something wrong with me. I'm sick. I'm broken.
We do need to give up on that.
Yeah.
We need to give up on that mindset, which is very tricky as someone that has anxiety. Oop, I touched this mic.
All right, we're even now.
Okay, good. But as someone that has struggled with anxiety, like it's way easier said than done to unhook from that mindset of seeing symptoms as threats.
Well, it's like you're scratching the itch, right?
Right.
In the moment, when you scratch a bug bite, there's nothing better in the whole wide world. That is the best feeling you ever did feel.
Right.
But then as soon as you stop scratching, you realize, this mofo itches way worse than it did before.
Right.
And it's hard to get out of that loop.
And it feels like you're solving the issue. Like it feels like you're being proactive because you're trying to connect the dots. Like, what did I eat earlier that's leading to the more bloating, and like what's going on? Like the more you focus in on the symptoms, like it feels like there's more level of control. But in reality, again, it just kind of heightens the importance of those symptoms. And it's like, if you're in the IBS space, the symptoms suck and they're not fun, and there's definitely a lot of avenues to help reduce them over time, but they're not necessarily acutely dangerous. And I think getting out of that mindset is so important for moving forward. And again, the more that you can kind of work on that piece of it, I think the more success that a lot of people are going to have long term. And it could be a good shift from focusing on some of the short-term stuff. It's like, okay, assessing where your mindset's at, because that could be something that could keep you spinning your wheels of like, I'm never giving up. But then if you're still doing some of these things that are keeping you on the same hamster wheel, it could be difficult to make progress.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'll bring this up, and I forget what episode I mentioned this in, but I'll paint a picture of two people with the exact same issue. Constipation. And arguably one person is much more severe. We had a student in FODMAP Freedom at one point, and if she skipped even one day of pooping, so like she pooped on Monday, she did not poop on Tuesday. By the time Wednesday rolled around, she would be losing her shit. Pun, again, always intended. But she would be like emailing us in a panic. She'd go to the Q&As in a complete panic. And she told me, no joke, that when you're not pooping, you are accumulating toxins, and her body is now toxic because, we detox through our poop. And so that was her rationale. Mm-hmm. And her body is now toxic because she's not pooping. And oh my God, what does she do? And it was like, okay, you got to get that piece of it out of your mind as quickly as humanly possible. Like that's only going to freak you out more than you really need. And I tried to coach her to the best of my ability. But meanwhile, my best friend from high school, I've told you about. So in a previous, I need to correct the record actually. Let the record show the updated update. So I shared in a previous episode this comparison and said that my best friend from high school poops one time per week. And then I mentioned it to her. I Marco Polo'd her and I was like, hey, Dan, you're going to be famous. I mentioned you on the podcast. Haha. And she goes, oh, Nick, actually, I probably poop only 3 times a month, actually.
Oh, gosh.
So it's worse than I thought it was.
I'm glad she's on board to the...
Yeah, she was unfazed. But here's the thing. You would never know. And for the record, I've offered to help this friend many times, and she's just not that compelled by it. She's like, oh, I would like to poop more, but whatever.
Right.
Like, she just marches about her day, but she's living her life. She goes to work. She has children. She hangs out with me when I'm in town. Like, she has a full, rich life. And if you ask her point blank, how many times do you poop per month? She'll tell you, but like, she's not losing her mind over it. And she's just like, whatever. And she's just marching around with a colon full of impacted poop.
Yeah.
And so again, the difference though is really startling. Like, here's my friend with much more severe chronic constipation, and she's totally unbothered by it and just walking around living her life. And then there's another person who skips one day of pooping and acts like it's the end of the known universe and spirals out of control. Like, one of those people clearly has a lot of anxiety and like health OCD and a lot of deep-seated fear kind of stuff to work through. And it's not my friend.
Right. I love the Michelle Cavanaugh episode when she refers to this as like, there's some people that typically when you don't have anxiety around certain things, where like your friend would be like, oh, I'm constipated. And that's period. End of story.
Yeah.
And then the FODMAP Freedom lady that you're talking about, it would be like, I'm constipated, comma, I'm toxic, comma, this is the end of the world, comma, right? Yep. Like I'm never going to get out of this. So it's this narrative and story that again will send your body into fight or flight and keep you stuck in fight or flight the more you ruminate about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a real tricky, because again, I think most people have that to some degree in the IBS space. And it's just working your way out of that, because again, someone's been at this for 5 years and they've focused on their symptoms for 5 years, and that has not helped. Even though it feels like it could somehow help. Like if I can just get that pattern, if I can like connect enough dots and like really focus in on that, how my symptoms are kind of like being changed like one day to the next, I can really get a handle on it. And I think that that's kind of a false promise for most people. Now, I think again, like there could be some people that have like one particular food that doesn't sit right. But when you're so fearful too, it makes it really hard to discern true like reactions versus, reactions that aren't true. Like a part of this conversation that another interesting point, Dave Mayo, I think I sent you, shared a study about the gluten-free. Yeah. There was like a gluten-free study. And I think it was so interesting because they had people with non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and they were blinded, and the people were blinded who were giving them the food. So they were told that they were getting gluten, but they weren't. And they had more severe symptoms than when they were actually given gluten and told that they weren't. Yeah.
No, I believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And I just, not that long ago, I finally posted a video on my YouTube channel about my coconut yogurt story. And I think I titled it kind of clickbaity. And it was something like, the time pain, bloating, and abdominal stension was all in my head. But long story short, people, if you haven't heard the story yet, I ate yogurt that was labeled coconut yogurt, and that it was at a conference. And then after consuming a big bowl, I realized I did not fact check to see if it was dairy-based coconut flavored yogurt or coconut milk yogurt. And I got super freaked out, and I was like convinced I had just eaten a big bowl of dairy yogurt, and I bloated up like you wouldn't believe. I looked about as pregnant as Amy right now. And I later, I went and asked, and I learned that it was in fact coconut milk yogurt, and the pain, abdominal distension, and bloating all melted away within about 60 seconds of learning that stupid yogurt was safe.
Yeah.
I'm still in disbelief, and it happened, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years ago.
Yeah. I think the mind is just such a powerful tool, and it could work for you or it could be working against you. And it's like, I think it's not something to feel like shame about if you're struggling.
Happens to us too,
right.
Clearly.
I had I had definitely health anxiety when I was dealing with my gut stuff, health anxiety, health OCD. And I wish I would have known. And again, part of it's too, like, would I have been open to the message during that time is kind of interesting to think about. But, I wish I would have really understood, because I think it kept me stuck for so long. Eventually, I came to like sort of the realization and went much more with the screw it attitude, because I had tried for, 3 years to sort of get this boat afloat again. And it seems like there was a really clear shift in my particular case when I was like, I've tried a lot of stuff. I'm just going to try to kind of like get back to basketball, like reconnect with friends more.
Yeah. Like, screw it. I'm going to live my life.
I'm done like making this sort of like the front and center piece of my life. And it wasn't an overnight shift. So it wasn't like, oh, I made this decision and my gut was just ravishing after that. It was so beautiful. But no, it took time. But like that, there was a very clear shift when I had that mindset change of like, I'm just over like trying to kind of supplement my way out of this, trying to restrict my diet.
Yeah.
And I just kind of want to move on to a degree.
Well, you bring an interesting layer to something we talked about already. The idea of you had tried to push yourself away from disease for 3 years.
Right.
And it had not worked for you. And so you didn't even shift gears to the pull side of it. You literally just let go.
Right.
And just the letting go was huge for you. And your body started to naturally gravitate over towards the health side of things.
Right.
So that's actually a third option that we didn't even paint initially.
Well, and that's like, it's funny you bring that up too, because when I've had like more postpartum-y OCD kind of stuff come up, one of the things that my therapist said that I think helps me visually think about like my anxiety, because a lot of my anxiety more postpartum is like different intrusive thoughts that kind of sticky thoughts. And she said she's like, one thing I want you to do is like envision, there's like a meme of like a guy just throwing papers up in the air, like in the office, like, screw it. Like, she's like, that's what you have to do in order to overcome anxiety to a degree, is like, stop trying to solve it. Just kind of let go.
Yeah. And
because some people will say like, accept it. And sometimes that doesn't really resonate. So
it paints a picture that you have to be happy about it.
Right. Which people that say accept it will clarify and say like, by accepting it, they mean that you're accepting that you have like the thought or that you have the thing, but not necessarily accepting it's true. So there is a distinction there. But I think sometimes just like, oh, you're not resisting it.
Mm-hmm.
You're not fighting it. Like you're not fighting with your symptoms every day.
Yeah.
You're not fighting with your diet every day. Like there's no like real intense fight. You're kind of embracing where you're at and just like not trying to change it.
Well, and again, like if you're fighting and pushing against something, the muscles are going to fatigue.
Right.
And you're going to get worn out versus, we grew up kind of around the same time, like 80s and 90s. There's a running gag that I've seen that says, I was raised to believe that quicksand would be a much bigger threat in my adult life.
Oh, yeah.
Like every movie in the 90s, it was quicksand that got the people. And like that was the big, height of the movie. And what they say, at least in those movies, is that the more you fight it, the more it's going to suck you in. But if you just relax and don't move at all, then you either will stop sinking or you might even start to float to the top a little bit and then you can get yourself out. So it's similar.
Right. Yeah. No, such a good analogy.
Should we start having a little like ticker counter in the corner of the screen, by the way, for all of the analogies and metaphors and teaching tools that we use?
Yes.
And we should just have like a record going.
I know. You're like a metaphor master. So
I'll take that. That's my new handle, people.
Yes. Metaphor master.
Yes. But I think one thing that I want to say, and then we could probably start wrapping this one up. I think we've said a lot of the same stuff in multiple different ways. So hopefully it's going to stick and resonate with the right people. Because sometimes you just need to hear the same thing said a different way or hear the same thing said for the 5th time before it sticks.
Right.
I would say the short-term stuff, so like the shiny antimicrobial or restrictive diet or elemental diet, and even things like probiotics, like the short-term stuff, we expect them to work very quickly within days or perhaps a week.
Mm-hmm.
The things that actually matter are the things that take time, like on the magnitude of a month to several months to really work. Mm-hmm. So again, if you could start to shift your strategy towards the things that are not going to make you feel better tomorrow, but you're okay with that, you know that, you understand, and you're willing to do it anyway, and you are willing to put in the time and effort to do the nutrition, movement, mindset, sleep, like that sort of stuff, I think that might be one way for people to kind of make sense of all this. Is like, if I look at a supplement or if I look at something that I've tried and I tried it because I expected it to cure me tomorrow, then maybe take a break from that.
Right.
Put that off to the side in the supplement graveyard. If it's something that I'm doing because I know that it's good for me and it promotes the health of my body, the health of my microbiome, and I know that it's not going to work immediately and I'm okay with that, then I would say you have my blessing to continue pursuing that thing.
Right. And I will say too, one last thought about like more the mental side too, is sometimes letting go of like the supplements and things will make you feel really irresponsible or like that you're dropping the ball in some way. And that's okay. Like you're going to have doubts that are going to come up and you just have to kind of let those doubts be there. And you could become more anxious to a degree, at least at first, until that kind of calms down.
Yeah.
Because you're changing like how your brain's perceiving things too. Like you're almost rewiring the brain. If you're just like, okay, I'm not going to like view the symptom as a threat. The brain's like, what do you mean? What do you mean you're not going to view this bloating as a threat? Why aren't you checking?
But you've seen it as a threat for 3 years. What are you doing?
So again, it's not an overnight shift. I think, again, like it can kind of feel irresponsible. Like anxiety can sometimes increase to a degree. You could get like a lot of doubts that come up and you just kind of have to
push through.
Yeah. Just kind of make the decision to not latch into the doubt and just say, hey, I'm kind of like done with this and I'm moving on to something else and move through it in that capacity.
And maybe set a time frame that you're willing to do something for. Mm-hmm. And that way you at least have a finish line, so to speak. So like, if you think we're full of prunes and you don't think this is going to work and you think we're just a couple of crazy ladies here in Cincinnati right now, you could try it just for shits and giggles and see what happens. And you could put a timestamp on it. Like, okay, fine, guys, I'm willing to try this for 6 months. Like, I'm willing to kind of fight with the anxiety and work on, mindset, nourishing myself better. Like, I'm willing to put in the effort for about 6 months and then I'm going to reassess. Well, now every time that anxious voice comes up in your brain and says, you're doing something terrible and awful and this is dangerous and oh my God, you should abandon ship, you can tell yourself, no. We're going to give this 6 months. I know this sucks right now. It's uncomfortable. I feel really freaked out about it. But when I set off to do this, I said I'm going to give it 6 months. Right. And I don't think anything scary and awful will happen to me in the span of 6 months. If it's already been multiple years that you've been trying to heal your gut, honestly, what is another half a year to just try something different and potentially make a lot of progress?
Mm-hmm. Wholeheartedly agree.
Give yourself that kind of deadline, and maybe that'll help you rationalize with your anxious brain when that does arise.
Yeah, true.
All right. Well, any thoughts for the last moments of our super special together episode?
I don't think so. I don't know. Just a couple crazy gals in Cincinnati.
That's right. I think the best way we could send them off for this episode is let's give them a nice, audible, in-person high five.
Woo!